I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
But of course, do your job, Inspector.
Thanks.
Correct match.
But why did you manipulate this rifle, Hubert de Noland?
Ask all the questions you'd like to ask. I'm at your service.
Walter Jones was not fond of Clara.
Walter Jones certainly asked me to find out about the chances of buying back Clara's father's consulting firm. I was supposed to advise Walter on the optimal moment to buy back the firm, at the best price, obviously.
I think that Walter Jones was unfair to Christina. I find her rather pleasant. Do you think like him that she's a gold digger without any scruples? After all, she could also have been interested in the estate.
Walter Jones didn't handle people with kid gloves, and Christina Bromsky was no exception, Inspector. Walter knew that Christina was manipulative and scheming. He was also well informed of Christina's limits. I don't think she will succeed in diverting the estate for her profit, despite her physical assets, which are obvious to the eyes, if I might dare say so.
This man was a damn maniac. He seemed to fuss over these weapons with great diligence.
Walter Jones was a great hunter who did not let anyone take care of the maintenance of his guns. He shut himself for long hours in his office. Later, the whole room smelled of flax oil that he used abundantly to shine the wood of his rifles. I surprised him cleaning his guns the very afternoon of his death when I joined him for work.
So Lorenzo was formerly a biathlon champion. He hid this talent from me, you see. I suppose he didn't lose any of his qualities as a sharpshooter.
Well, Lorenzo definitely knows how to shoot. He often borrowed a rifle from Walter. To distract himself, he enjoyed shooting gulls from the window of his studio. I confess that he had developed a certain expertise in this activity. He claimed that the acidic excrement from these birds was likely to prematurely endanger certain ornamental sidings that decorated the summit of the tower.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
No doubt about it. This one looks a lot like it.
This family photo is very touching. I imagine that you learned to shoot because you have a gun in your hands?
Now, this photo was taken in Tanzania. That year, I was very much part of the hunting party, even though I never liked to shoot animals. At the time, Walter loved taking his grandchildren on safari. He maintained that it contributed to their education.
Explain to me why this gun has your fingerprints, Mr. Noland.
I knew that I ought to have told you from the beginning, but I was afraid that you would suspect I was the murderer. When I saw that something was turning out badly between Baina and Walter, I took this rifle and I removed the eyepiece to observe what was going on. Now, I was more than 200 meters away, and it was thanks to this rifle scope that I could distinguish Baina, who was pushing Walter over the edge. But the idea of shooting at Walter never crossed my mind. Why would I have killed him? He who made my career and generously remunerated me for my services.
You already lied to me. Now you want me to believe that you did not make use of this gun? How do you want me to believe you again, Noland? Okay, and supposing I believe you used the rifle as binoculars and not as a weapon, who could have taken the rifle after you and shot Walter Jones?
I didn't run into anyone when I left my office. I'm the only one left in the tower who has a key card to enter this office. I don't understand how Walter Jones could have been killed by this rifle. Please, believe me.
After all, why not? Lorenzo, I got the Rogatory Commission along with all the powers that go with it. And I need a key card that opens all the doors in this tower.
No problem. Here, take this. It
belongs to an employee who had access to all the rooms in the tower. And then, find the guilty party as fast as you can, Inspector.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close. The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
Oh, that's great news. Baena's cleared of all suspicion. It's fully to your credit that you recognized your mistake, Norm. I imagine that you weren't at all aware of the arm that was used in the crime, Inspector.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
But I already told you, Norm. I hated Mr. Jones for what he did to Baena. But despite everything, I'm sorry for the death of the old man, believe me. I remember being surprised by Baena's violence. Even if I could understand that she was taking revenge for Jones's beastly brutality. After his fall, I came out of my hiding place to reassure Baena. I promised her that I would protect her. I was ready to give evidence that the old satyr had assaulted her again. But Baena pushed me away and fled to take refuge in her father's cabin. At that moment, I confess, I was convinced that she'd intentionally pushed him, that she'd ruminated over taking revenge against Jones, and that if she'd agreed to accompany her torturer on his stroll, it wasn't totally innocent. In fact, I thought maybe she was waiting for a chance to revenge herself. And now, Inspector, you're telling me that Baena is innocent. Oh, now I am sure that she must detest me for having thought her guilty.
This man was a damn maniac. He seemed to fuss over these weapons with great diligence.
Mr. Jones was a long-time hunter, Norm. And like all self-respecting hunters, he took great care of his guns.
Tell me, you have an impressive sports record, Mr. Battaglieri. You haven't completely lost your touch, I suppose.
I don't like your question, Inspector. I can see what you're getting at, you know.
You don't have to worry, if you have nothing to reproach yourself for.
I admit that I was a very respectable shot in my youth. But the taste for weapons has now passed, you see.
Did Walter Jones wear this chain around his neck?
I can corroborate that, Norm. It was this chain.
What could this bottle of flax oil have been used for?
This flax oil is used to take care of the stocks of the luxurious rifles belonging to my boss, Inspector. It's an absolutely sensational product for bringing out the veins in precious woods.
If I believe what I'm told, you are a top-class shot. At any rate, with seabirds of the region.
Those who say that are slandering fools. Since then, I've lost my touch. I'd miss an elephant in a tunnel, Inspector.
What do you think of Christina?
Ah, Christina, the charming Slav. The celebration of beauty, passion, fury. Oh, yeah, Inspector. Christina is one of those women who makes us turn our heads, poor men that we are.
What can you tell me about Marco?
Marco Jones? The real son of his grandfather. Selfish, lazy, self-righteous, and corrupt to boot. He's a sycophant, Inspector.
Do you know if Walter Jones was wearing something around his neck on the night of his death?
I remember very well that Mr. Jones always wore his chain around his neck. Why would he have taken it off? It had the key to his room and to his safe hung from it.
Do you know who in this tower knows how to use a gun?
Apart from Walter Jones, I don't really know.
Did you see anyone in the library the evening of the murder?
You know perfectly well that I was not there, Norm. On the other hand, the computer ought to be able to tell us. All you have to do is ask it. But I have to know Mr. Jones's secret code. You understand, my boss didn't want cards assigned giving access to his office and his library without his consent. Do you have the code, Inspector?
Sorry, but I don't have it.
What a nuisance. Oh, but wait. I know that Jones hid the code in his desk. Unfortunately, I don't know precisely where.
I'll take note of it. This could be useful. I will certainly be able to use this for something. This could be useful. I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close. Sorry, but I understand nothing about architecture. I would like to have some things in this sketchbook explained.
You'd better ask Lorenzo for this, Inspector Norm.
This menu seems utterly appetizing. Tell me, what are we eating today?
Don't get your hopes up, Inspector. Wasn't the chef recently laid off?
This tower on this wild island, far from everything. Isn't it madness?
My grandfather asked me to write up a section on history for this pamphlet. I'm an anthropologist by training, specializing in the arts of the Americas and Oceania, and I'm very interested in Maldivian culture. But in the end, what I wrote was cut.
What luxury. For some, the world is all roses. But where did the staff go? I don't see them.
I don't know. You have to ask Noland. He's the one in charge of these practical questions. This building is kind of a megalomaniacal gesture, I must say. So big in such a small and wretched place. Still, I'm sorry that the exercise rooms with pool, sauna, and natural thermal baths were not constructed. That would really have been awesome, don't you think?
The autopsy is categorical. Walter Jones died from a bullet wound in his back, and not as a result of his fall from the Tortoise Belvedere. With all the doubts stemming from the circumstances, Baena has nothing to do with the death. Nevertheless, I would love to have your point of view on this.
It's a nightmare. My grandfather killed by a bullet, but I don't understand. It's not possible.
What were you doing at the hour of the crime, around 11 p.m.?
I was at the restaurant between 9:45 p.m. and 11 p.m. First, I cleared the table with Billy and Clara. Since there was no more staff, we were obviously obliged to cope by ourselves, weren't we? After this, I watched a bit of television with Martin. Billy was bored stiff and suggested we play poker. Outside of poker, you know, I don't think anything else exists for my brother. Clara had a row with him, as usual, and the mood deteriorated. On top of that, poker bores me. So, Martin, Christina, and Billy began a hand, and I went up to Lorenzo's studio. Up there, the view is spectacular. I wanted to watch the storm which had started to lash the island. I always loved storms. I was alone. Lorenzo was not there. I helped myself to a drink. But let me point out to you right away, Inspector, I could not see the coastal path. Lorenzo's studio does not overlook that part of the island at all. After a while, Lorenzo was still not back, and I'd had enough. Don't misunderstand me, Mr. Norm. I wanted to chat with him. There's no ambiguity in our relationship. He's an eccentric fellow and a little cuckoo, and I wanted a change of air. I came back down to the restaurant, and I found Billy, Martin, and Christina still in the thick of it. And the sight was intolerable. Billy almost ruined his life with poker, and it's very painful for me to watch him play like an addict. Christina had left to go to bed. Martin wanted to read a manuscript for his publishing house, and he went back to our room. The storm had excited me, and I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I stayed on with Billy and Clara. We talked. At one moment, I remember we stopped because it was thundering so loudly. It was really impressive. You could see the landscape across the panoramic window like in broad daylight. And I started to worry about our grandfather. After all, he was an old man, and it bothered me to know that he was outside in weather like that. I asked myself what he was up to. Finally, I told Billy that we had to go and check things out. He asked me to first give him one last whiskey. My brother was also an alcoholic, Mr. Norm, you'll realize soon enough. So I poured him a glass, and I served myself a glass of wine to keep him company. We talked about this and that till 11:30 p.m. We'd almost forgotten about Grandfather.
I thank you for your help.